Berlin, November 1923. A man walks into a butcher shop with a briefcase, not to make a deal, not to conduct business, to pay for a single pound of pork. He snaps open the latches, turns it over, and dumps stacks of Reichsmarks onto the counter like they're confetti. The butcher doesn't even count it. He weighs it, because by that point it was faster to measure currency by mass than by denomination. That briefcase contained 4.2 billion marks. It bought enough meat for 2 days, and it gets worse. While that man walked home, the currency lost another 30% of its value. By the time he reached his door, his remaining marks were worth less than the paper they were printed on. This wasn't fiction. This wasn't a warning from an economist. This was Tuesday in the Weimar Republic. And here is the thing no one tells you about that story. The people who survived, who kept their families fed, who maintained shelter, who held any semblance of stability through 18 months of total monetary annihilation, they were not the ones holding cash. They were not the ones with gold hidden under the floorboards. They were the ones holding things that people needed, things that couldn't be printed, things that couldn't be debased. 7 specific categories of items became more valuable than gold during that collapse, and then again in post-WWII Germany, and then again in Yugoslavia in 1993, and in Argentina in 2001, and in Venezuela in 2018, and in Sarajevo during 425 days of siege. I went through the forensic record of every major monetary collapse of the last 100 years and pulled the same pattern every time. Not prepper theory, not survivalist speculation, historical documentation. What you're about to see is a century's worth of economic autopsies, compressed into 7 items that tell you exactly what money really is when governments fail. Pay attention, because the data suggests you may need to know this sooner than you think. Before we get to the list, you need to understand the architecture of what you're dealing with. Currency collapse follows a 5-stage sequence that is almost mechanical in its consistency. Stage 1. A government spends more than it collects. Stage 2. It prints money to cover the deficit. Stage 3. Each unit of currency buys less, because more units are chasing the same amount of goods. Stage 4. People flee the currency into anything tangible. Stage 5. Total collapse. The currency either hyperinflates into worthlessness or is abandoned entirely. This sequence is now repeated in over 50 documented cases in modern history. In Weimar Germany, the mark went from 320 per dollar in mid-1922 to 4.2 trillion per dollar by November 1923, a 13 billion % devaluation in roughly 18 months. In Yugoslavia in 1993, the projected monthly inflation rate reached 1 million %. Prices doubled every 2.3 days. In Zimbabwe, the government printed the $100 trillion note in 2008. In Venezuela, inflation crossed 1 million % by 2018, the worst peacetime economic collapse in at least 45 years, according to the Institute of International Finance. Same pattern, same stages, same outcome, every single time. And every single time, without exception, the people who survived did it through one mechanism. They possessed things that could not be printed, things that other desperate people were willing to trade for, things that had utility when utility was scarce. Here are the 7. Number 1. Tobacco and cigarettes. This is the item most people get wrong. When they think about financial collapse barter, they imagine gold coins and canned goods. They rarely think about cigarettes, but the historical record is unambiguous. During the final stages of Weimar hyperinflation, cigarettes became so widely accepted as a medium of exchange that German economists gave the phenomenon its own name, Zigarettenwährung, cigarette currency. According to historical records, cigarettes could buy goods that paper marks simply could not, because they were portable, divisible, universally coveted, and, crucially, their supply could not be arbitrarily expanded by a printing press. The story sharpened further after World War I. By May 1945, the Reichsmark had become essentially non-functional. Historical research has documented that the German money was refused in approximately 50% of all consumer transactions during this period, replaced by direct barter or commodity money, the most dominant of which was cigarettes. American GIs could purchase cartons from the post exchange for 5 cents. On the Berlin black market, that same carton sold for 300 marks. A single cigarette was worth 7 marks, the equivalent of roughly $1 at the time. The New Yorker reported directly from Berlin in July 1945 that a pack of American Chesterfields could command up to $75 to $90 on the black market, not because people were addicted, because the cigarette had become money. It was standardized. A carton was always 200 cigarettes. It was portable. You could carry significant value in a coat pocket. It was divisible. A single cigarette, or even a fraction of one, could serve as small change. Barbers accepted cigarette ends as payment. Glaziers took a bowl of stubs as a day's wage. The same pattern emerged in Sarajevo during the Bosnian War from 1992 to 1995. Currency had collapsed. Banking had ceased to function. Survivors documented that cigarettes, alongside coffee and alcohol, became one of the primary survival currencies. A Sarajevo survivor recorded, "Salt was expensive, but cigarettes and coffee were even more valuable." The lesson the historical record delivers here is precise. Addiction creates inelastic demand. In times of crisis, the items people crave psychologically become as powerful as the items they need physically. Tobacco has been that item across every major collapse of the last century. Its supply is limited, its demand is nearly constant, and no government can print it. Number 2. Alcohol and spirits. In October 1923, as Berlin collapsed into hyperinflation, the Weimar Republic saw a documented shift in what wealth meant. Art, jewels, and fine wines were being traded not as luxury goods, but as survival currency, exchanged for bread, milk, and basic staples. The Sarajevo record is the most specific. One survivor, a man who lived through the entire 1,425-day siege, gave one of the most widely read first-hand accounts of economic collapse survival. His words on alcohol: "I had lots of alcohol and traded it without problems. Alcohol consumption grew over 10 times compared to peacetime. 10 times. In a besieged city where people were starving, dying of infections, burning furniture to stay warm, they were trading more alcohol, not less. Why? Because alcohol performs multiple functions simultaneously. It numbs physical and psychological pain. It serves as a disinfectant and primitive antiseptic. It stores indefinitely without refrigeration. And crucially, it provides temporary psychological relief from conditions that would otherwise be unbearable. In a collapse, that relief becomes something people will trade nearly anything to obtain. Hide in Argentina's 2001 financial collapse, where the peso lost 3/4 of its value, 25% unemployment became reality, and over half the population fell below the poverty line. The barter networks that emerged organically documented alcohol as a high-demand exchange item. In Venezuela, as the bolivar disintegrated, imported spirits commanded extraordinary value on informal exchange markets. Spirits, particularly high-proof, shelf-stable liquors, check every box a functioning currency requires. They don't expire, they're portable, they have universal psychological demand, and their value actually increases in proportion to how desperate a situation becomes. One operational detail the historical record consistently confirms: volume matters for liquor as a barter asset. A sealed, unbroken bottle commands vastly more trust and value than an opened container. Standardization builds trading power. Number 3. Medicine and antibiotics. There is a direct quote from a Bosnian War survivor that belongs in every serious conversation about financial collapse. He was a paramedic during the siege. This is what he said: "In these conditions, my knowledge was my wealth. Be curious and skilled. In these conditions, the ability to fix things is more valuable than gold." He was talking about medical knowledge and the items that came with it. Sarajevo's banking system ceased functioning during the siege. Currency was worthless, but there was a hierarchy of need that structured the entire informal economy. Survivors documenting what they wish they had stockpiled placed medicine at item number 7 on the list, right after batteries and candles. Painkillers, antibiotics, even the most basic pharmaceutical supplies became impossible to obtain through normal channels. The currency and banking systems had collapsed. The supply chains had collapsed. What remained was trade. People died of diarrhea in Sarajevo, not from bullets, from diarrhea, from infections that under normal conditions would be treated with a 3-day course of amoxicillin. Simple diarrhea kills in days without medicine under limited water conditions. Skin diseases spread. Wounds became infected. One Bosnian survivor estimated that a wounded person who found a doctor had approximately a 30% survival rate, not because of the injury, but because the antibiotics and equipment to treat it properly no longer existed. The forensic implication for barter value is severe. When a commodity stands between a person and death, they will trade almost anything for it: gold, firearms, food. The record confirms this explicitly. One survivor traded all of his gold for ammunition, noting that gold did not hold strong trading value in that environment. Medicine consistently outperformed it. This pattern is not unique to Sarajevo. In Zimbabwe, as the health system collapsed alongside the currency, basic pharmaceutical supplies became extraordinary barter commodities. In Venezuela, The collapse of the healthcare system alongside the economy created the same dynamic. Medications that were available in pharmacies for nearly nothing became black market items traded for food and fuel. The single most powerful medical barter item in every collapse is antibiotics, followed by pain management medication. Both address immediate life-threatening need. Both are impossible to produce locally. Both have shelf life measurable in years when stored correctly. Number 4. Food and agricultural production. This item requires a distinction that most analyses miss. During financial collapse, not all food is equally valuable. There is a hierarchy. And the hierarchy is determined by one variable: caloric density combined with shelf stability. In the final stages of Weimar hyperinflation, farmers became the most economically powerful people in Germany. They had withheld goods from money-based transactions because the money had no value. They traded food directly for the things they needed. The historical record from 1923 Berlin is stark. Doctors were paid in firewood or potatoes. Teachers received eggs, coal or butter. A can of beans in besieged Sarajevo cost $30 to $40. That was not the listed price. That was the barter equivalent in the informal economy. Argentina in 2001 documented this with forensic clarity. As the peso collapsed, barter networks called relied spread throughout the Buenos Aires region. These were formal exchanges where people traded services and goods with their own internal currencies. Community gardens, huertas comunitarias, appeared across Buenos Aires neighborhoods. People who had been urban professionals discovered that the ability to produce food created trading power that the collapsed peso could not. The specific items that commanded the highest exchange value consistently across collapses are shelf-stable proteins, cooking oils, salt, and seeds. Salt deserves particular attention. It appears in the Sarajevo survival record as expensive. It appears in the Weimar record as a critical barter commodity. It has been used as currency. The word salary derives from the Latin word for salt, salarium, referencing Roman soldiers being paid partly in salt. It preserves food. It is irreplaceable in cooking, and it cannot be produced by individuals without access to specific natural resources. Seeds, specifically non-hybrid seeds capable of producing plants that themselves produce viable seeds, represent the most long-horizon form of food-based barter value. In Argentina's community garden movement, access to productive seeds created sustained trading power in ways that no stored food could replicate. Number 5. Fuel and energy sources. In Sarajevo from 1992 to 1995, winter was not an abstraction. Without heating, people froze. With no electricity, darkness was total. Survivor accounts documented people burning furniture, doors, and books to generate heat. One Sarajevo survivor listed cooking fuel as item number 8 on the things she wished she had stockpiled. When wood ran out, people burned literally anything that would combust. In Zimbabwe, as the currency and economy collapsed simultaneously, fuel became one of the primary informal exchange commodities. The documentary record shows businesses hoarding goods and fuel in warehouses, creating artificial scarcity that drove barter value to extreme levels. The ability to run a generator, which required fuel, became a significant source of relative economic power in a country where electricity infrastructure had also collapsed. Venezuela documented a near-identical dynamic. As the bolivar disintegrated, gasoline became a de facto currency in regions where formal exchange had broken down. Fuel commands this role in collapsed economies because it is immediately deployable. It generates heat, powers generators, enables transportation. It solves multiple problems simultaneously, which is the hallmark of high barter value. Portable fuel sources, sealed propane cylinders, high BTU lighters, lighter fluid, and particularly fire-starting tools like waterproof matches command exceptional value in the early stages of a collapse, when people still have infrastructure but have lost access to the supply chains that normally keep it functioning. The Sarajevo record is specific. Lighters and matches were the second most regretted non-stockpile item among survivors, right after soap. Fire was life, and the ability to give someone fire, reliably, in a package small enough to fit in a pocket, translates directly into the ability to demand significant value in trade. Number 6. Clean water and purification. The pattern in Argentina, Bosnia, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela aligns on a single, brutal fact. In every collapse, clean water becomes the first commodity to disappear from reliable availability. In Sarajevo, the city's water infrastructure failed. Survivors described a hierarchy of solutions: small rivers that quickly became contaminated, containers for collection, and the knowledge of how to purify what could be found. The Sarajevo survivor record explicitly notes, living near a well with a manual pump is like being in Eden. What turned water from survival resource into barter commodity was access technology. The person with a water filtration system, a ceramic filter, purification tablets, or even knowledge of improvised filtration had something every other person in the collapse needed. Clean water is not optional. It is not negotiable. There is no substitute. A person without clean water begins deteriorating within 24 to 48 hours and is dead within 3 to 5 days. The barter dynamic this creates is the most extreme of any commodity on this list. The demand is absolute and the supply in collapse conditions is near zero. Boiling purifies but doesn't remove taste, smell, or chemical contamination. Bleach treatment requires precise dosing. Ceramic filters work on biological contamination across high volumes consistently. Water filtration devices, particularly compact high-volume systems, represent some of the highest per-unit barter value of any portable item in documented collapse economies. In Bosnia, the ability to provide clean water to neighbours created sustained trading relationships that carried through the entire siege. Number 7. Gold and silver, with a critical asterisk. The conventional wisdom says precious metals, and the conventional wisdom is partially right, but the Sarajevo record delivers a correction that changes the analysis entirely. The survivor who traded all of his gold for ammunition was not making an irrational choice. He was making a rational one, calibrated to his specific conditions. He needed security more than he needed a store of value. His gold bought ammunition because ammunition, in that environment, represented immediate survival utility that gold itself did not. That is the asterisk. Gold preserves purchasing power across the arc of a collapse, before, during, and after. The Weimar data is unambiguous. An ounce of gold bought the same basket of goods in 1918, 1923, and 1925. The currency that denominated those goods went from 8 to 4.2 trillion marks per dollar and back again. Gold didn't move. In Zimbabwe, gold priced in Zimbabwe dollars went from roughly 10,000 to 100 trillion, not because gold gained value, but because the currency measuring it became worthless. Same in Venezuela. Gold in bolivars rose by millions of %, reflecting not appreciation of gold, but total annihilation of the bolivar. But gold has a problem that the other 6 items on this list do not. It cannot be eaten. It cannot treat an infected wound. It cannot heat a room. It cannot generate power. In the acute survival phase of a collapse, the first weeks and months when the supply chain has failed and physical need is immediate, gold has low immediate utility compared to antibiotics, food, water, and fuel. Silver performs more practically in early-stage barter because it can be subdivided into small denominations that match the scale of everyday transactions. Pre-1965 US silver coins are recognizable, trusted, and fractional. A silver dime is a real transaction. Half an ounce of gold is not. The correct framing is this. Gold and silver are vehicles for preserving wealth across a collapse, not for surviving the acute phase of one. The other 6 items on this list are for surviving the acute phase. Gold is for what comes after. Hey. Now let me tell you what doesn't work, because the forensic record is equally clear about failures. Stocks and bonds. In every hyperinflationary episode on record, paper assets denominated in the collapsing currency became worthless, not diminished, worthless. In Weimar Germany, middle-class families who had spent decades building savings portfolios watched them disappear in months. In Zimbabwe, pension funds vaporized. In Venezuela, domestic equity markets offered no protection because the currency measuring their value was itself the instrument of destruction. Real estate has a more complicated record. In normal recessions, real estate holds value. In full currency collapses, it can become illiquid to the point of being untradeable. You cannot eat your house. You cannot carry it with you if conditions require movement. And governments in collapse conditions have historically implemented asset freezes, confiscation programs, or property laws that destroy the practical value of ownership. Cash savings are the most catastrophic strategy. Every economic autopsy confirms this. The entire mechanism of hyperinflation is a tax on cash held. The people wiped out most completely are invariably the people who saved most diligently in the currency that subsequently collapsed. Here is the forensic summary. 7 categories of barter items have demonstrated consistent, documented, high-value performance across every major financial collapse of the last century. Tobacco, alcohol, medicine, shelf-stable food, fuel, clean water access, and precious metals. The first 6 address immediate physical and psychological need. The 7th preserves wealth for reconstruction. The items that failed, consistently, completely, without exception, were paper assets, currency-denominated savings, and anything whose value derived entirely from the continued functioning of the financial system that had just collapsed. The question the data is really asking is not whether any of this applies to the present moment. The question is whether you have looked at the present moment carefully enough to ask it yourself. US government debt now stands at 130% of GDP. The annual deficit runs at approximately $2 trillion. Central banks globally have expanded balance sheets at rates that would have been unthinkable before 2008. The average lifespan of a fiat currency is 27 years. The modern US dollar's current form, unmoored from gold, has existed since 1971. Do the math. Not because collapse is inevitable, but because every person who lived through the collapses described in this video believed, until the moment it happened, that it couldn't happen where they lived. The Weimar Germans believed they were a sophisticated industrial nation. The Zimbabweans believed their country was once among Africa's most prosperous, and it had been. The Venezuelans believed they sat atop one of the world's great oil reserves, and they did. They were all right, until they weren't. The forensic record does not predict the future. It only documents what has already happened, repeatedly, across multiple countries, across multiple generations. And what it documents is this: when money stops working, certain things keep working. The people who knew which things those were, who had thought about it before the crisis arrived rather than after, were the ones who came out the other side. Now you know what those things are.